The first sensation Ethan Nash felt was cold. Not the biting cold of space or the artificial chill of cryosleep, but the gentle cool of recycled air against his skin. His eyelids flickered, struggling against centuries of stillness. The soft beeping of medical equipment filled his ears, a sound both familiar and somehow wrong. When his vision finally cleared, he found himself staring at a ceiling that shimmered with an organic, pearl-like quality. Definitely not the stark white panels of the Starship Horizon he remembered entering cryosleep in. His heart rate spiked, causing the medical equipment to chirp in protest. "Patient is conscious," announced a melodic voice from somewhere beyond his field of vision. "Vital signs stable but elevated." Ethan turned his head, muscles protesting the movement, and felt his breath catch in his throat. The being standing beside his bed was unmistakably alien, tall and elegant, with skin that rippled with patterns of bioluminescence beneath a deep indigo surface. Her features were almost human, but refined to an otherworldly perfection that made her both beautiful and unsettling. Her luminescent eyes met his, and he saw something there he hadn't expected: fear, quickly masked by professional detachment. "You are safe, human Nash," she said, her voice carrying that same musical quality. "I am Chief Xenobiologist Thura Val. You are aboard the Astrian Research Station Lumeris." Ethan tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Thura held a water cylinder to his lips, though she kept her distance as much as possible while doing so. The liquid was cool and slightly sweet. "The horizon?" he managed to rasp out. "Your vessel was found drifting in the Carina Nebula, preserved but severely damaged," Thura explained, checking readings on a holographic display that emanated from her wrist. "You are the first of your crew we've successfully revived." The first. The word hit him like a physical blow. How many others had they tried to wake? How many had they lost? The memories came flooding back: the mission to establish humanity's first extrasolar colony, the critical drive failure that had forced them to activate the emergency cryosystems, the desperate hope that someone would find them before it was too late. "How long?" he asked, dreading the answer. Thura's bioluminescent patterns shifted, creating what he imagined might be an expression of concern. "By your Earth calendar, approximately 300 years." The room seemed to spin. 3 centuries. Everyone he'd ever known was long dead. Earth itself might be unrecognizable, if it still existed at all. He closed his eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. "Your psychological reaction is expected," Thura said, her tone clinical but not unkind. "We have extensive data on temporal displacement trauma in recovered humans." "Other humans?" Ethan's eyes snapped open. "There are more of us?" "Several thousand recovered from various vessels and facilities," she confirmed, though her patterns darkened slightly. "Most serve as cultural liaisons or technical consultants. Your expertise in quantum engineering will be particularly valuable, once you've completed rehabilitation." He noticed how she maintained a careful distance, how her hand often strayed to what looked like a security device on her belt. Despite her professional demeanor, everything about her body language screamed distrust. "You're afraid of me," he stated simply. Thura's patterns flashed in surprise, then settled into rigid geometric shapes. "I maintain appropriate caution based on historical data." "Historical data?" "The first contact between our species did not go well," she said diplomatically. "There were incidents. But that is a discussion for another time. You need rest." As if to emphasize her point, fatigue washed over him in a heavy wave. The drugs in the water, he realized belatedly. Standard revival protocol, he'd helped design it himself, centuries ago. "Wait," he called as she turned to leave. "What happened to Earth?" Thura paused at the door, her patterns swirling in what might have been sympathy. "Sleep now, human Nash. Some answers are better faced with strength." As consciousness faded, Ethan found himself focusing on the graceful movements of her bioluminescent patterns. Like aurora borealis on skin, he thought hazily. Beautiful, but so very alien. His last thought before the drugs pulled him under was a wonder at how humanity's first contact with such a remarkable species could have gone so wrong. He dreamed of Earth, of stars, and of lights dancing beneath indigo skin. When Ethan woke again, the medical bay was dimmed for the station's night cycle. He felt stronger, his mind clearer. The room was empty save for another patient several beds away, an Astrian whose patterns pulsed weakly in sleep. Moving carefully, he pushed himself to a sitting position. His muscles protested but held. A datapad beside his bed activated at his movement, displaying his medical information in both English and flowing Astrian script. His eyes caught on his official designation, Human Subject EN 7249, Nash, Ethan. Status, Viable. Security Class, Restricted. Subject. Restricted. The words sent a chill down his spine. The door whispered open, revealing Thera. Her patterns shifted rapidly, surprise at finding him awake, followed by something he couldn't interpret. You should not be upright yet, she chided, approaching with measured steps. I've been lying down for 300 years, Ethan replied. I think that's long enough. To his surprise, Thera's patterns rippled in what might have been amusement. Your species' use of humor as a coping mechanism is fascinating. We're just delightful that way, he said, then grew serious. Level with me, Dr. Val. What's my situation here? Really? She studied him for a long moment, her patterns settling into steady, thoughtful waves. You are both a medical miracle and a security concern, she finally said. Your revival was unexpected. Most humans of your era. She hesitated. Don't survive the process, he finished. I helped develop the cryogenic systems. I know the risks. Yet you volunteered? Someone had to go first. Her patterns shifted again, curiosity warring with ingrained caution. She moved closer, though still maintained a careful distance. Your psychological profile suggests minimal aggressive tendencies, yet you chose a potentially fatal mission. This contradicts our data on human behavior patterns. Maybe your data needs updating, he suggested. We're not all whatever you think we are. Evidence suggests otherwise, she said softly, almost to herself. Then, more professionally, you will begin physical rehabilitation tomorrow. If you progress well, we can discuss your future role on the station. And if I don't want a role here, he asked carefully. Her patterns stilled completely, a reaction he was beginning to recognize as stress or alarm. That is not currently an option, human Nash. Ethan, he corrected. If we're going to be seeing a lot of each other, you might as well use my name. She tilted her head, considering. That would be irregular. I'm getting the feeling that's going to be a theme with me. Another ripple of what he hoped was amusement crossed her skin. Rest. Ethan. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without sleep deprivation. As she turned to leave, he called after her, You never answered my question about Earth. Thera paused, her patterns dimming. No, she said quietly. I didn't. The door closed behind her, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the steady pulse of the sleeping Astrian across the room. He lay back, mind racing. There was something they weren't telling him, something about Earth, about what had happened between humans and Astrians, about his true status here. But he'd seen something else too, a crack in Thera's professional facade, a hint of curiosity that matched his own. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And after 3 centuries on ice, he had nothing but time to unravel the mystery of what had happened while he slept, and why this fascinating alien woman looked at him with such a complicated mix of fear and intrigue. He closed his eyes, but sleep was long in coming. In the darkness, he could still see the ghost of bioluminescent patterns dancing behind his eyelids, like stars waiting to be explored. Physical rehabilitation was brutal. 2 weeks into his new life on Lummera Station, Ethan found himself in what the Astrians called the recovery chamber, a vast, circular room with gravity controls that could be adjusted for different exercise routines. His muscles burned as he completed another lap around the chamber's perimeter, fighting against the artificially increased gravity. "Your progress exceeds expectations," Thera noted from her observation post. Her patterns rippled with what he was learning to recognize as professional satisfaction. Most revival patients require months to achieve this level of mobility. Most revival patients didn't help design their own cryopods, Ethan managed between breaths. "I knew exactly what my body would go through." Knowledge does not typically translate to accelerated physical recovery, she countered, making notes on her holoscreen. "Your determination is noteworthy." Ethan slowed to a walk, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Was that almost a compliment, Dr. Val?" Her patterns flickered in that now familiar way that might have been amusement. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd noticed her gradually relaxing around him, though she still maintained strict professional boundaries. "Merely scientific observation." "Right." He grabbed a hydration pack from a nearby dispensary. "Speaking of scientific observation, when do I get to start working? I didn't spend 3 centuries in cold storage to become a professional jogger." Thera's patterns shifted to more serious geometrical shapes. "The Science Council is still debating your security clearance level. Because of whatever happened between our species that no one will tell me about?" "Partially." She hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "Walk with me?" Surprised by the invitation, Ethan fell into step beside her as they left the recovery chamber. He noticed how she no longer flinched when he came near, progress, however small. "Your revival was not entirely authorized," Thera said quietly as they walked through the station's pearl-white corridors. "I had been studying your cryopod's unique modifications for months. When the power core began to fail, I had to make a choice." "You saved my life," Ethan realized. "Against orders?" Her patterns darkened. "The official protocol for damaged pods is to allow natural termination. But your design innovations, they were brilliant. I couldn't let that knowledge be lost." "So you woke me up to pick my brain?" He tried to keep the hurt from his voice. "Initially," she admitted. "But you've proven unexpected." They reached a sealed door marked with Astrian script. Thera placed her hand on a scanner, and the door slid open to reveal a laboratory filled with familiar equipment, or at least, equipment he recognized the purpose of, even if the designs were centuries ahead of his time. "This is my private research lab," Thera explained, her patterns showing slight nervousness. "I've been studying the quantum mechanics principles you incorporated into your cryosystem. They're far more advanced than anything else from your era." Ethan moved through the lab, taking in the holographic displays showing familiar equations. "These are my calculations," he breathed. "You decoded them?" "Most of them. But there are elements I can't decipher." She activated a central display, showing a complex series of formulae. "Your approach to quantum field manipulation, it's completely different from our methods. More elegant, in some ways." "It had to be," Ethan explained, falling easily into the familiar territory of theoretical physics. "We were working with limited power resources. Had to make every quantum count." He reached for the holographic display, instinctively trying to adjust one of the equations. To his surprise, it responded to his touch. He looked at Thera questioningly. "I upgraded the interface to recognize human biosignatures," she said, her patterns swirling with what might have been embarrassment. "I had hoped that we could work together," he finished, unable to keep from smiling. "The Science Council would not approve," she said, but her patterns suggested she wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "Because humans are dangerous?" He turned to face her fully. "Thera, what really happened between our species?" She was quiet for a long moment, her patterns moving in slow, troubled waves. War, she finally said. When we first encountered human colonies, there was misunderstanding. Fear on both sides. Mistakes were made. Cities were destroyed. Millions died. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly. But that wasn't me. I'm from before all that. I know. Her patterns shifted rapidly. That's what makes you so fascinating. You're from a time before the hatred, before the violence. You look at our technology with wonder instead of suspicion. You treat me as what? As a person, not an enemy. She turned away, moving to adjust something on a nearby console. It's irrelevant. The Council will never approve full collaboration. Ethan studied the equations floating between them. These calculations, they're about power distribution, aren't they? You're having problems with your quantum cores? Her patterns flashed in surprise. How did you? The variables you're struggling with. They're the same ones we faced with our colony ships. He gestured to a particular sequence. See here? You're trying to force stability through brute force. But if you approach it from a different angle. His fingers danced through the holographic numbers, making subtle adjustments. The equation shifted, simplified, resolved into something new. Thara's patterns blazed with sudden understanding. That's brilliant, she breathed, moving closer to study the changes. So simple, yet we never considered. Sometimes you need fresh eyes, Ethan said. Or very, very old ones. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, he saw no fear in her luminescent eyes. Perhaps, we could keep these sessions unofficial? For research purposes only? Dr. Val, are you suggesting we break rules together? Her patterns rippled with definite amusement now. I'm suggesting we advance science together. The rules are merely inconvenient obstacles. I knew there was a rebel hiding under all that professional detachment. He grinned. When do we start? We already have. She gestured to the equations still floating between them. Unless you need more recovery time. 300 years of sleep is plenty of rest. He rolled up his sleeves. Show me what else you're working on. As they bent over the holographic displays together, Ethan couldn't help but notice how their shadows merged, human and Astrian, while above them, equations danced like stars waiting to be understood. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were the most important part of any equation. The aftermath of their discovery in Sector 7 transformed Lumeris Station into a powder keg of tension. 3 days after exposing the illegal experimentation, Ethan found himself in a secured conference room, facing the assembled Science Council. Thara stood beside him, her patterns displaying a calm he suspected she didn't feel. The severity of these violations cannot be overstated, Council Leader Wren declared, his elderly patterns moving in agitated waves. Director Venn and his associates have been detained, but the damage to interspecies relations may be irreparable. With respect, Council Leader, Thara spoke up, the damage was done by keeping these experiments secret. Healing can only begin with truth. Truth? A younger council member's patterns flashed angrily. The truth is that humans devastated 3 of our colony worlds before we developed defenses against them. These experiments, while regrettable, were aimed at preventing another war. By torturing innocents? Ethan's voice was quiet but intense. Those people in the pods, they weren't soldiers or terrorists. They were civilians, lost in space like I was, looking for a new home. And yet your kind search for new homes historically ended in bloodshed, another council member noted. Enough. Wren's patterns commanded attention. What's done is done. The question now is how to proceed. The human survivors are being treated in medical, but their eventual status must be decided. And there is the matter of your own violations, Dr. Val. Unauthorized revival of human Nash, illegal access to restricted areas, broadcast of classified information. All of which exposed crimes against sentient beings, Thera countered, her pattern steady. I accept whatever punishment the Council deems appropriate, but these humans deserve freedom and restitution. Freedom? The word rippled through the Council like a shock wave. To do what? Return to Earth? There is nothing left there for them to return to. Ethan's heart stopped. What? The Council chamber fell silent. Thera's patterns shifted to deep concern as she turned to him. You never told him, Ren realized, looking at Thera. I was waiting for the right time, she admitted softly. Tell me what? Ethan demanded, though part of him already knew. Ren's patterns displayed something like sympathy. Earth was lost in the final days of the war. The human government, facing defeat, deployed experimental weapons that rendered the planet uninhabitable. The few survivors were evacuated to colony worlds under Astrian protection. That was 50 years ago. The room spun. Ethan gripped the edge of the conference table, his knuckles white. Earth. Gone. Not just changed or rebuilt, but lost entirely. And Thera had known. I wanted to tell you, she said quietly, her patterns showing genuine distress. But after everything else. You didn't trust me, he finished, the hurt evident in his voice. Even after everything, you still saw me as a potential threat. No. Her patterns flared with emotion. I saw you as someone who had already lost everything once. I couldn't. I didn't want to be the one to take away your last hope. Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. A junior officer burst into the chamber, patterns chaotic with panic. Council leaders, we have multiple unauthorized launches from the medical sector. The human survivors, they're attempting to steal transport vessels. How? Ren demanded. They were under guard. They had help, the officer reported. Internal sensors showed Dr. Ven's research team released them. They're trying to reach the quantum gateway. Understanding dawned on Ethan. The experiments. You weren't just studying human consciousness, were you? You were studying our technological knowledge. Our weapons capabilities. Ven believed humans were planning another war, Thera realized, her patterns showing horror. He was using the stasis experiments to extract technical data from their minds. And now they have access to both current Astrian technology and centuries of human military advancements, Ethan finished. They're going to try to reactivate the gateway. Create a corridor back to the colony worlds. Which would bypass all our defensive systems, Ren said grimly. If they succeed, they could launch attacks anywhere in Astrian space. Millions would die. Not if we stop them. Ethan turned to Thera. Your quantum modifications, the ones we developed together. They could destabilize the gateway, prevent activation. It would take precise timing, she said, her patterns already calculating. And we'd have to get close enough to implement the changes. The gateway chamber will be heavily guarded. By people who think all humans are violent monsters, Ethan noted. Maybe it's time to prove them wrong. Ren studied them both. This alliance you two have formed, it goes beyond professional cooperation, doesn't it? Thera's patterns swirled with complex emotions as she met Ethan's eyes. It does. Then perhaps there is hope for our species after all. Ren's patterns formed the geometric shapes of formal authority. Dr. Val, human Nash, you have the Council's authorization to prevent this catastrophe. But be warned, if you fail, we will have no choice but to destroy the entire station to prevent gateway activation. Understood, they said in unison. As they rushed from the chamber, Ethan caught Thera's arm. Why didn't you tell me about Earth? Her patterns rippled with sorrow. Because I was afraid. Of me? Of losing you. Her patterns pulsed with an intensity he'd never seen before. When you first woke up, you were a scientific curiosity. Then a colleague. Then. She paused, patterns shifting to intimate geometrics. I've never met anyone, human or Astrian, who sees the world quite like you do. Who makes me question everything I thought I knew. I didn't want that to end. Ethan touched her face gently, feeling the subtle warmth of her bioluminescence under his fingers. It doesn't have to. For a moment, they stood there, two beings from vastly different worlds, connected by something deeper than biology or physics. Then the station shuddered as another transport launched, and reality reasserted itself. We should go, Thera said, though her pattern suggested reluctance. Together? Ethan asked, echoing their words from Sector 7. Always, she replied, and her patterns painted the corridor with the colors of hope as they ran to save both their peoples from the consequences of fear. The quantum gateway chamber was a cathedral of technology, its soaring walls lined with pulsing energy conduits that converged on a massive circular frame. Ethan and Thera crouched behind a maintenance console, watching as Ven's followers worked frantically to bring the ancient device online. 7 minutes until full power, Thera whispered, her patterns dimmed to near invisibility. Once they initiate the sequence, we'll have only moments to implement our modifications. And if we're off by even a microsecond, we'll tear a hole in spacetime, Ethan added. No pressure. The rescued humans, 23 survivors of Ven's cruel experiments, moved with desperate purpose, their borrowed knowledge of Astrian technology making them dangerous improvisers. Among them, Ethan recognized the woman they'd saved first, now armed and coordinating the others. They're not evil, he said softly. Just scared and angry. They woke up to find Earth gone, their families long dead, and themselves victims of torture. Violence feels like their only option. Thera's patterns showed understanding. Fear makes prisoners of us all. It's what started the war in the first place, both sides too afraid of the other to see any path but conflict. A sudden commotion drew their attention. Director Ven was being led into the chamber, still in restraints but wearing a satisfied smile. The gateway is responding to the original codes, one of the humans reported. Just like you promised. Of course, Ven replied, his patterns radiating smug superiority. Humans are so predictably aggressive, it was simply a matter of extracting the right military protocols from your minds. Once the gateway opens, you can have your revenge, and I'll have proof that humans can never be trusted. He wanted this, Thera realized, her patterns shifting with anger. The experiments, the torture, he was trying to provoke exactly this response. Then let's disappoint him, Ethan said. He touched her hand, feeling the warm pulse of her bioluminescence. Ready? She entwined her fingers with his, patterns forming the intimate geometrics he'd come to cherish. Together. They moved as one, emerging from cover with their hands raised. The humans spun, weapons ready, but hesitated at the sight of one of their own with an Astrian. Stop! Ethan called out. You don't know what you're doing. We know exactly what we're doing, the woman they'd saved responded. They tortured us, stole our memories, our knowledge. Now we're taking it back. No, Thera stepped forward, her patterns blazing with truth. You're letting them win. Ven and his followers wanted to prove humans were inherently violent. Every act of revenge proves them right. They destroyed Earth, someone shouted. And humans destroyed 3 of our worlds, Thera countered. Where does it end? When every human and every Astrian is dead? When we've turned the galaxy into a graveyard because we were too afraid to try another way? There is no other way, Ven sneered. Humans only understand force. Really? Ethan moved closer to the gathered survivors. I woke up on this station, surrounded by aliens who feared and distrusted me. I could have fought. Instead, I chose to learn. To understand. And you know what I found? He gestured to Thura. I found that love doesn't care about species. That trust can bridge any distance. That fear only wins if we let it. Pretty words, the woman said, but her weapon lowered slightly. But they don't change what was done to us. No, Thura agreed. Nothing can change the past. But we can change the future. Her patterns shifted to include all present. The council knows the truth now. Ven and his conspirators will face justice. The surviving humans will be given full rights, reparations, the freedom to build new lives. Or, Ethan added, you can open that gateway. Start another war. Prove that every awful thing they believed about humans was right. The choice is yours. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of power building in the gateway. The woman looked at her fellow survivors, then at Ven's satisfied expression, then finally at Ethan and Thura's joined hands. How do we know they'll keep their promises? She asked. Because they'll have us to hold them accountable, Ethan replied. Both sides. Together. A tense moment passed. Then, slowly, the woman lowered her weapon completely. Stand down, she ordered. The other survivors hesitated, then complied. No. Ven's patterns erupted in fury. You're proving my point. Humans can't be trusted. They're all violent savages who... Oh, shut up, Thura said, and stunned him with a precise shot from her sidearm. I thought you didn't believe in violence, Ethan noted, amused. I believe in necessary action, she replied, her patterns rippling with satisfaction. And he was giving me a headache. The gateway powered down as security teams finally arrived. In the chaos of arrests and medical attention that followed, Ethan and Thura found a quiet moment together. What happens now? He asked. Now, she said, her patterns forming the complex geometrics that meant future and hope and something very like love, we build bridges. Between stars? Between hearts. She touched his chest, her bioluminescence pulsing in time with his heartbeat. The council will need advisors to help integrate the human survivors. People who understand both species, who can help heal old wounds and prevent new ones. People like us? Exactly like us. Her patterns shifted to playful intimacy. Unless you have other plans for the next few centuries? Ethan pulled her close, marveling at how natural it felt to hold her, how right. I think I could be persuaded to stick around. Above them, through the chamber's viewport, stars wheeled in their ancient dance, unchanging witnesses to the moment when two species began to learn that love was stronger than fear, that understanding could overcome hatred, and that sometimes the bravest thing two people could do was simply reach across the divide and take each other's hand. In the depths of space, on a station named for light, a human and an Astrian had found something extraordinary, not just in each other, but in the possibility that their love represented. A future where differences were celebrated instead of feared, where old wounds could heal, and where the barriers between worlds existed only to be bridged. It was a beginning. And like all the best beginnings, it started with two hearts beating as one, painting the darkness with hope's own light.